Welcome everyone to the Coda Bears Lunch and Learn on Accounts Payable. I'm Karen Shannon and I'll be presenting today. I have everyone muted to limit the background noise. If you have questions, type them into the chat window and I'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Today's session is being recorded and will be put up on the Coda Bears YouTube channel. If you wish to get notifications when the new videos are available, please email sales@codabears.com to get added to the appropriate group. So today we're talking about Epicor Kinetic Accounts Payable. Many of you may already know all about accounts payable, but today I will be showing how some parts of the accounts payable module work in the Kinetic user interface. I will have to speed through things today and we still may go over time and not have much time left for demo, but the presentation includes static examples that are shown. So again, as mentioned, please put any questions you have in the chat window and I will answer them at the end of our meeting today, or if further research is needed, possibly with a later follow-up email. So I'll start out with an overview of accounts payable. I'll mention the company configuration and setup programs, and then I will discuss and possibly demo the other three parts listed here: invoice entry, payment processing, and banking, and how they are a part of Epicor accounts payable. So the overview of accounts payable. Accounts payable is an accounting term used to describe the money owed to vendors or suppliers for goods or services purchased on credit. The role of the accounts payable department is to provide financial, administrative, and clerical support to an organization. Here is a visual example of the process, starting at the top with the request for goods and continuing to the right up to the end where you settle accounts payable by either reviewing balances and bank statements, for example. So these are the three main areas in company configuration that have settings related to accounts payable. We have two screens that show the accounts payable tabs and a taxes tab and a purchasing tab. The fields highlighted in yellow have settings to review closely related to accounts payable. Review each field in Epicor Help or ask questions at the end of the presentation about any of the specific fields to answer as we have time left. Here I'm showing many of the setup programs related to accounts payable. I will mention some of these during the demo, but we will not have time to explain each menu item. As I demo the main areas of invoice entry, payment entry, and bank processing, I will try to explain any of these setup menu items that relate to the area being covered. Again, any additional questions can be asked at the end as time permits. So here we have the example of all the different types of invoice entry. We should run the received not invoice report to show what needs to be paid and when. And this slide shows the different kinds of invoices as mentioned: the advanced billing, invoicing, receipt billing, unreceived billing, miscellaneous lines, and recurring invoices. The next few slides show a static example of each of invoice type. So this is an example of invoice entry advanced billing line invoice. Most of the different types of invoices start off in the same way. You'll enter the basic information, such as maybe a PO if you need to for that type of invoice, enter or verify the supplier, enter the invoice number, the invoice date, the invoice amount, and you can either enter or verify the supplier terms. The main difference between the different types of invoices will be that you add a new, whatever invoice type it is, a new line. In this case, the invoice type is the new advanced billing line. This type of invoice is useful when a supplier requires you to fully or partly pay for purchase order lines prior to the supplier releasing the shipment. The second type is the receipt billing line. Again, you start with entering the basic information for the invoice, such as the PO, enter or verify the supplier, enter the invoice number, the invoice date, the invoice amount, and enter or verify the supplier terms. For this type of invoice, you would choose a new receipt line. Here I've added a miscellaneous header charge and a line miscellaneous charge also to a receipt billing line. Receipt billing invoices are the most common type and which you will typically use as your invoice type. To create this type of invoice, a receipt for the PO must have already been entered. Again, using the receive not invoice report helps to work with these types of invoices, and you can verify which receipt billing invoices that you want to create. The next type of invoice entry is unreceived billing line invoice, and those are only used when a payment is made against a shipment in transit from a supplier. So for example, a supplier is located in Europe and the ordered parts have been shipped by boat. It may be weeks before the product arrives at your company, but the invoice has already arrived. And the freight on board terms are factory. Once the goods are received, you use the invoice receipt match to match the invoice to the receipt. This invoice line type is rarely used, so it's only discussed here without having an example. Invoice entry, the next type is a miscellaneous invoice entry and a job miscellaneous line invoices. Typically, miscellaneous line invoices are created to account for miscellaneous expenses that are not linked to purchase orders or job records. Job miscellaneous line invoices are used to add new material lines to a job and additional on-the-fly job charges, which may or may not have been planned for on the job. This is an example miscellaneous line invoice with an allocation, which is one of the things in the setup area. You have to set up allocations where this allocation has already been set up before we created the miscellaneous line. And the last type of invoice entry example we have here are the recurring invoices, and those are for the same parts or services which have a specific schedule. Using this invoice type, you can recreate them automatically based on previously set up parameters on a recurring cycle. Again, that's something that's done in the setup area. You can set up a monthly recurring cycle, for example, and then you can set up recurring invoices. You do not have to manually create these invoices. You have to create the first source one, and they're only allowed and used with AP invoices that have miscellaneous lines. So the process for creating recurring invoices involves creating a recurring cycle, marking an invoice as a recurring source invoice, and assigning a recurring cycle. And then use the generate recurring invoices process in AP to generate recurring invoices based on the recurring source invoice. So next large area in accounts payable is the payment processing. There is a payment proposal report to show what should be paid and when. This slide shows the different types of payments that will be demoed or discussed in today's presentation. You can use the select invoices option, pay an invoice with a bank fee, process an AP prepayment, and process a miscellaneous payment. And then you can look at the check register to review what you paid for the day or the week or whatever you'd like. The next few slides show a static example of each payment type. So here is an example of the payment proposal report. And you use that to display the AP invoices that need to be paid up to a selected due date. One line prints for each invoice due on or before the selected due date. The current total due on the invoice displays on that line. The report is sorted by the due date value on each AP invoice. You can also use the report to display invoices with discounts available and display the values of the discounts based on the proposed payment date. So here is an example of the first type of payment processing using the select invoices option. So you use the overflow menu from the payment group. You can enter a due date and other options to select invoices for payment. Notice the boxes on the top here that show the candidates, the selected invoices, and the remaining invoices. So the candidates will be a total of all of those within that date range, and the selected will be the ones that we checked, and then the remaining are the ones that are unchecked. Here's an example of a single invoice being paid with a bank fee for overdraft. So it's pretty straightforward to pay a single invoice and add a bank fee. An AP prepayment, here's an example. So you enter a new payment with the supplier, and then you add a miscellaneous payment where you check the prepayment box in your invoice miscellaneous payment line. So then you add a miscellaneous payment where you check the prepayment box, enter the amount and a reference PO if you wish. The invoice number is auto-created, and the GL account will be for the prepayment GL account. So Epicor will automatically create this invoice number based on what you enter in for the other fields on the screen. The next type of payment processing is a manual miscellaneous payment. So for example, you might write a manual or physical check to pay for office supplies to a supplier that doesn't exist in Epicor in supplier maintenance. Your payment method will be something like an AP physical check, depending on what you set up, what it might exactly be called, but something similar to that. And you don't have to print the payment because the check was previously written. You still likely want to print the payment remittance advice. That's up to you. And then you will likely want to change the default GL account because it comes from a different GL account. And then, as mentioned, you can review the check register to see what you have paid for the day or between a couple of dates or whatever you would like. So you enter the dates for the starting and end date and filter by the bank account And this has an example of how the report would look. Next is the banking area and how it relates to accounts payable. This slide shows a few of the banking functions that relate to accounts payable that will be demoed or discussed in today's presentation. Bank adjustments, bank funds transfer, and bank statement processing. And again, the next few slides show a static example of each of these banking functions. So here is an example of the bank adjustment entry, and they're similar in processing to invoice entry and payment entry in that first you create a group, then you create the adjustment or adjustments, and then you print an edit list and then post the adjustments. This has an example of a static example of the bank adjustment screen. So we did a KES fee for $10 on this screen. There's a bank funds transfer option in a menu item in Epicor for accounts payable. You use this menu item to move amounts between bank accounts. This simple screen shows the apply date. You select the from and to bank. So from the main checking account to the payroll checking account. And then you enter the amount. And the current balance and the new balance will be updated as you fill in that amount. There is a transfer button at the bottom of the screen to complete the transaction. So bank statement processing is the third area in accounts payable that will be discussed today, and this is where you can create a new bank statement either by importing an electronic statement file from your bank or by manual entry of new bank statements and statement lines. You can review the information, search for Epicor transactions available for matching, or create new transactions. Epicor has different modes for bank reconciliation. There's an automatic mode, which uses a reconciliation algorithm, and a manual mode, which means that you would match the transactions to statement lines. Here I show an example that someone else already started on bank statement processing, and due to the time constraints, bank statement processing is only shown as an example and will not be part of the demo today. So now we'll take a little more in-depth look at many of these items in Kinetic. So I mentioned at the beginning the company configuration and the particular modules that have settings related to accounts payable are finance and accounts payable, and we have all the different fields that are related to accounts payable listed here and continuing on down. We also have the taxes tab for the taxes module, and this section right here relates to accounts payable. And then we have the purchasing area, which has basically this setting here that relates to accounts payable. Some of the others are, indirectly related, but here you can choose to close your purchase orders based on arrival, receipt, or invoice. Also wanted to show where the setup items are here in accounts payable. We talked about there's one example that has an allocation and the recurring cycle for another example's invoice. So we're just basically mentioning these, and if you have any specific questions, please put them in chat for the end of the meeting. Thank you. But in the meantime, we have our invoice entry. So I created a blank group to start out with our examples. Okay. The kinetic interface has not been kind to me in the last couple of days. All right, let me go out and go back in because it's not showing my group to come up. Okay, so there's our group. And to create a new invoice, you can click on the new plus button there. And as mentioned before, we want to print our report for the received not invoiced. And being this is in a system, we need to go back pretty far to get some data. So I'll just let that run in the background while we're doing our first example here. So we can put in a supplier for an advanced billing line. Okay. A dash Z. And then we want to put in our invoice number, which you would have from the vendor, or can create one, whatever. And then our amount. And then we can skip over to the invoice date. We can use today's date if we'd like and verify our terms. And that's most of the setup for all the different types of invoices. When you get to a receipt invoice, you're going to want to put in the PO, and then it'll bring in the invoice or the supplier anyway. But when you're doing an advanced payment, you might not have a PO to reference. But anyway, you can do save here to save the header information, and then you can go to the invoice lines and do a new advanced billing line, and you can see all the different types of lines here. So it automatically fills in the description that it's an advanced billing line, and we need to put in the amount and the extended amount. And we can put in, sure. Trying to get it to show on my screen here. You can put in a PO and line that are not on received, not invoice list. So and then we can save that. So now we can see our invoices created down here. This is the invoice number that we gave it. If you click on it, you can bring it up. And you can see all the details about it, and you want to look at especially the variance and make sure that you don't have a variance between your header or your amount you put in and the line that you used. In the meantime, our received not invoiced has come up, so that's available for the next type of invoice. So we can go back to invoice entry and then do a new invoice. And for this, we want to pick an invoice that's on our received not invoiced. And then we want to put in an invoice number again and an amount. And that again you would get from your report for the amount. Let's see, where's Glenn Gary? So you can see the 6250 and its PO and line 1. And we need to finish by putting in our invoice date, and then you can verify or change the terms if you need to. So then we save this, and then we'll do a new invoice line. And again, you go to the invoice and you can do new receipt line, and that pulls up any of the receipts on this PO, so you can select it and then say to create lines. And I was getting this in my testing too, but it still works, so I'm not sure what's up in our environment. But anyway, we have the receipt of goods, and you can see all the information here related to it on that invoice line. And again, if you go back to the invoice detail, you should double check that you don't have a variance, and we don't. So this will work for our receipt line. And I almost forgot, my coworker who has worked extensively in accounting wanted to remind you about using this received not invoice report. It's very important. You should run it at least monthly, and if you don't, you could end up with duplicate invoices. For example, one accounts payable person creates an invoice for a PO without linking it, and another one creates an invoice that links to the PO. Make sure to run this report at the beginning of each month before anything new is received, and so you can balance that report against the GL account for your AP clearing account. Evidently, another customer has had tons of duplicate invoices that she's working on cleaning up, so she wanted me to emphasize you looking at this report and using it, and somebody should be analyzing it probably every week, and then every month you want to run it before you receive anything new for the month to balance. Okay, so that was our example for the receipt billing line. We don't have an example, as mentioned, for the unreceived billing lines because that's a pretty rare occasion. So The next one we can do is miscellaneous with an allocation, and that might be where we're going to stop because we're already at our time. So we'll do a new invoice here. Open the invoice detail, and this time we want a different supplier. And we can verify the terms if we'd like to, and then again we're ready to save this and do a new line. And we want to do the plus to get a miscellaneous billing line here. And then in the expense, we want to type in a description as expense. Oh, there's a description. And then get to our extended amount. And so we can save that. And then if we go to the invoice line detail, and select our tab for the GL analysis, we can allocate the 12,000 by picking an allocation. In this case, it's utilities. Put in our amount again. Say OK. And based on what we set up in allocation in the setup area, I think it's based on square feet in this case, that an amount is separated out between each of the different GL accounts for each different area that's responsible for it. So these amounts all add up to the 12,000 already, so you need to also make sure to delete this top line so that you don't have really $24,000 allocated, and save that. So that's where we're going to end today. Thank you for joining, and look for this recording on YouTube, our Code of Bears YouTube page in the future. And we look forward to presenting to you again in the future.